turn now to Josef Gregory Mahoney for insight on Xi's visit to Serbia. He's a politics and international relations professor at East China Normal University in Shanghai. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Professor, Serbia's president said they are moving from strategic relations to the joint future of our two countries. Explain the significance here, and how does this elevate the relationship between China and Serbia?
Well, one of the things that we've seen is that the two countries decided on Wednesday to upgrade their relations. Their relations for the past 8 years have been described as a comprehensive strategic partnership, but will now be upgraded to building a community with a shared future. And I think in this context, we can see clearly the associated efforts of programs like the Belt Road Initiative that have contributed so substantially to helping Serbia improve its infrastructure, but also green development, as your lead-in noted.
We're looking at some video now. The red carpet was rolled out, 29 new agreements signed. What stands out to you about this visit, and what was accomplished?
Well, you know, I look at it from a bigger picture. There are many different sides to Europe and many competing interests. So much so that many worry that the EU project over the last decade or so as a resistance to the U.S. hegemony has collapsed due to internal divisions worsened by various U.S. pressures, as well as more recently broken ties with Russia. Now, what we see in this visit, not only to Serbia, but also to Hungary and France, is President Xi speaking directly to two different sides of the EU divide. On the one hand, we know that France has been a moderate voice on China and Western Europe, and at least sometimes tried to be a reasonable voice on Russia. On the other hand, much of Central and Eastern Europe have mobilized as part of a very determined anti-Russian bloc in NATO, and in turn facilitated greater U.S. hegemony in Europe, which is run contrary to Chinese as well as what Macron regards as French interest, especially as it intersects with U.S. efforts to isolate and contain China. And we know that one of the things that President Xi emphasized in his visit to Serbia is this desire to resist hegemony. Now, in Central and Eastern Europe, Hungary and Serbia have been the exceptions. They have not been sucked into the anti-Russia hysteria or American attempts to make China somehow responsible for Russia's conflict with Ukraine. They understand the U.S. is fighting a proxy war in Ukraine and should shoulder a significant amount of responsibility for provoking the conflict there as well as for continuing it now. They understand the U.S. is moving towards a new Cold War paradigm, and they want to avoid it, to be part of Europe, but also have good relations with China and, if possible, Russia. And in Serbia, this understanding is the strongest. And indeed, this is why China and Serbia decided to upgrade their ties, and why it serves as a clear signal to other countries that they can choose a similar path.
Yeah, and President Xi's first visit to Europe in 5 years. This visit to Serbia happened on a pretty significant date for both countries. So if you can, this was a visit that was very much planned, arrived on the date this anniversary of NATO bombing on a Chinese embassy. What does this show?
Well, I was in China, unfortunately, when the bombing took place in 1999, and it was a very tragic event. It was something that deeply wounded China. There was a tremendous amount of outrage. As an American in China, I felt that personally, and of course, I was deeply horrified and embarrassed by it. But you know, this was an important moment. It wasn't that China had picked a side. China, I think, was neutral in that conflict, not with respect to NATO, but in terms of the conflict that Serbia was having with its neighbors. And China, like Russia, had not withdrawn its diplomatic staff. And in turn, the U.S. hit one of the two places in Belgrade that they couldn't hit, the Chinese embassy. And this has, of course, been long debated about whether or not the United States did this intentionally, or whether it was a mistake, or whether the U.S. just didn't respect China enough to make sure that it didn't proceed with that kind of tragic event. Nevertheless, I think that event certainly stands out in the memory of many Chinese, and I think it galvanized relations going forward. And remains a touchstone for those relations today.
Professor Mahoney, always great to get your take. Thank you so much for joining us from Shanghai.